Hello, I'm Dr. Karen Boese, and I teach at the University of Glasgow at the Dumfries campus in the School of Social and Environmental Sustainability. My focus is in the area of literacy education. I teach in a variety of our education programs, including our Masters in Language and Literacy Education. Reading is a fundamental skill, and it impacts all aspects of life. For example, reading has a huge impact on academic success, social engagement, and your life trajectory. Reading rates are tied to crime, delinquency, incarceration, and unemployment rates. So therefore, reading is a critical skill. And what does that reading look like? Well, reading requires explicit, systematic instruction. It's not like oral language. Oral language happens very naturally, and that's because our brains are wired for oral language. Children at home hear lots of language. Speaking and listening comes about very naturally because that's the way our brains are wired. Reading is not the same. For reading to take place, the brain has to be rewired. Neural circuits have to be connected. So in order for reading to occur, instruction is critical. So what does that instruction look like? Well, the instruction should be based on what science tells us, and there are decades of research from the science of reading that tell us how children learn best and how they actually learn to read. So what does that science of reading tell us about how we can best support reading? Gow and Tumner have put forth a theory of reading called the simple view of reading in 1986. And within that simple view of reading, they highlight two very important components: that decoding is critical and language comprehension is critical in order for reading comprehension to occur. And that tells us as educators that we can't neglect either of those. And it especially informs our need to know that decoding and teaching children how to decode text has to be part of any literacy program. The two critical components that were highlighted in the simple view of reading have been further represented in a graphic by Scarborough in Scarborough's reading rope. And this reading rope not only represents the two important strands of word recognition and language comprehension, this illustration also breaks it down into the sub-skills that are required in those two major components. Within that decoding component, which is like word recognition, Scarborough broke that down further to help us see that the sub-skills that are required there are phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition, how students can gather a bank of words that they can recognize by sight. The language comprehension portion of the rope is broken down to a number of sub-skills as well, including background knowledge and vocabulary and language structures such as syntax and semantics, and verbal reasoning, which includes metaphor and understanding inferences, and literacy knowledge, which includes things like print concepts and understanding genres. An important way that Scarborough's reading rope informs teaching practice is so that teachers understand that all of these components are critical, and if there's one weak component, that needs to be assessed, and intervention has to be specific and targeted to the area of concern in order to address the needs of all students. An important pillar for reading development is phonemic awareness. And phonemic awareness has to do with being able to hear and manipulate sounds in spoken words. And when children are learning, they need to be able to blend those sounds together. When a child is developing that phonemic awareness, can they put the sounds together in k, to form the word cat? So that blending skill is important in decoding, and you can see how that specifically informs the reading process. The opposite of that is segmenting those phonemes. Can a child take sounds apart that are within a word? Can they hear the word dog and break it down into the sounds they hear? Can they hear d, g? Can they segment those sounds? And you can see how that is the opposite of the decoding, and it is encoding. And encoding is a critical skill for spelling. So the decoding and the encoding, which relates to the blending and the segmenting, directly informs children's ability to become readers and spellers. The next pillar is phonics. And phonics has to do with being able to take those sounds, or the phonemes, and match them to the graphemes, the letters that represent those sounds. And that's a critical process in students in reading development. Another important aspect is fluency. We have to support students to develop fluency, and fluency has to do with automaticity in the reading, accuracy in the reading, and using expression. And one of the reasons fluency is critical, because if a child is reading very slow and methodical, it's very choppy, and it inhibits their ability to actually comprehend what they're reading. Another important pillar is reading comprehension. And reading comprehension has to do with a child's ability to process the information that they're getting from the text. Can they make connections? Can they make inferences? Can they make predictions? And are they able to monitor their understanding as they're reading? Another important pillar is vocabulary. Children have to know the meanings of words that they're going to encounter in print. We know that children will learn a lot of words indirectly, but there's also evidence to suggest that children need explicit instruction in vocabulary as well. Oral language is also an important component of reading development, as is knowledge development. The more we can support children in building their prior knowledge and their background knowledge, they'll have more to bring as they decode and unlock text. In conclusion, we know that reading requires explicit systematic instruction. It should be based on the science of reading, and teachers need to be trained to have the knowledge and skills in order to base their pedagogical practices in the science of reading. Initial teacher education institutions and in-service teacher professional learning needs to provide teachers with the knowledge and skills they require so that they can actually make an effort at closing the attainment gap. At the University of Glasgow, we are very serious about the role that we play in closing the attainment gap. Therefore, we've designed a component to our education program that involves students having the opportunity to actually tutor a struggling reader for an entire term. It's called Book Buddies, and we partnered with our local schools so that we could have our students work with struggling readers in the school system. And this informs their understanding about how children actually learn to read, and it enables them to take that research and link it with practice. The Book Buddies initiative supports our students in becoming better literacy educators. It helps the student that they tutored for the entire term become a better reader. But really, the most important component is that it will help all the children that our teaching graduates will go on to teach throughout their career. It's important to remember that the right to an education involves the right to read for all.